How's it going, guys? I am your local hopeless historian, and this is Boobaloo, and we are continuing our dissection of the epic rap battle between Winston Churchill and Theodore Roosevelt. Before we get into it, feel free to subscribe, like, tell us what part was your favorite, and check out my Patreon down below. Now, let's get into the video.
So walk softly over here and give my big stick a suckle! Pass me a cigar and a large glass of brandy. I'm about to take you out prematurely, like your family.
Roosevelt's life was actually plagued with untimely deaths in his immediate family, mostly of whom died in their 30s and 40s, with the exception of a single sister, Corinne. His parents, Theodore Roosevelt Sr. and Mittie, or Martha Roosevelt, died at the young age of 46 and 48 from typhoid fever and complications from gastrointestinal tumors, respectively, with his wife and mother dying only mere hours apart on February 14, 1884. While Roosevelt was working at the New York State Legislature attempting to get a government reform bill passed, he was summoned by his family home. He returned home to find his mother, Mittie, had succumbed to typhoid fever. On the same day, his wife, Alice Lee, died of Bright's disease, a severe kidney ailment. Only 2 days before her death, Alice Lee had given birth to their daughter, Alice.
I am the Rhyme Minister, fresh in a hat and dinner jacket. You look like a mix of Epic Lloyd and a Pringles packet. I was saving the planet from an axis of darkness.
He was Prime Minister of Britain during the Second World War.
That's why you were back home opening national parks.
Of all of Roosevelt's achievements, he was proudest of his work with the conservation of natural resources and extending federal protections to land and wildlife. Roosevelt worked closely with the Interior Secretary James Rudolph Garfield and the Chief of the United States Forest Service, Gifford Pinchot, to enact a series of conservation programs that were often met with resistance from Western members of Congress, such as Charles William Fulton. Nonetheless, Roosevelt established the United States Forest Service, signed into law the creation of 5 national parks: Crater Lake National Park, Wind Cave National Park, Sully Hills, Platte National Park, now part of the Chickasaw National Recreation Area, Mesa Verde National Park, as well as adding land to Yosemite National Park, the home of Ansel Adams' favorite site, El Capitan, and signed into law the 1906 Antiquities Act. This law gives the President of the United States the authority by presidential proclamation to create national monuments from federal lands to protect significant natural, cultural, and scientific features. The act has been used more than 100 times since its passage, under which he proclaimed 18 U.S. national monuments, including Devil's Tower in Wyoming, Cow Canyon in New Mexico, and the Grand Canyon. He also established the first 51 bird reserves, 4 game preserves, and 150 national parks. The area of the United States that he placed under public protection totals approximately 230 million acres. Roosevelt extensively used the executive order on a number of occasions to protect forests and wildlife lands. During his tenure as president, by the end of his second term in office, Roosevelt used extensively orders to establish 150 million acres of reserved forestry land. Roosevelt was also incredibly unapologetic about his use of the executive orders to protect the environment, despite the perception in Congress that he was encroaching on too many lands. Eventually, Senator Charles Fulton of Oregon attached an amendment to an agricultural appropriations bill that effectively prevented the president from reserving any further lands. Before signing that bill into law, Roosevelt used executive orders to establish an additional 21 forest reserves, waiting until the last minute to sign the bill into law. In total, Roosevelt, under executive orders, was able to establish 121 forest reserves in 31 states, and prior to Roosevelt, only one president had issued over 200 executive orders, by Grover Cleveland with 235 executive orders. The first 25 presidents issued a total of 1,262 executive orders, whereas Roosevelt issued 1,081.
You were born asthmatic, you're going to choke hard.
Roosevelt's youth was largely shaped by his poor health and debilitating asthma. He repeatedly experienced sudden nighttime asthma attacks, which caused him to learn of the experience of being smothered to death in your sleep. which terrified justifiably himself and his parents. While doctors actually had no idea of a cure or a treatment, and this actually led to his father encouraging him to live a life of an outdoorsman and an athlete to attempt to somehow mitigate or fix the issues that Roosevelt is having.
While I wake up every day and chain smoke cigar, I'll fight you on the beaches, I'll fight you on the beaches. Anywhere you want to fight, I'll fight you and I'll beat you, see?
Roosevelt's youth was largely shaped by his poor health and debilitating asthma. He repeatedly experienced sudden nighttime asthma attacks, which caused him to learn of the experience of being smothered to death in your sleep, which terrified justifiably himself and his parents. While doctors actually had no idea of a cure or a treatment, and this actually led to his father encouraging him to live a life of an outdoorsman and an athlete to attempt to somehow mitigate or fix the issues that Roosevelt is having.
I might be battling you even though I'm toasted, but tomorrow I'll be sober and you'll still be roasted.
So there are two separate versions of the rumored greatest burn in all history. First, Churchill had been drinking heavily at a party, as he normally did, when he bumped into a political rival, Bessie Braddock. She said, "Mr. Churchill, you are quite drunk," rather harshly. Whereas Churchill responded, "And Bessie, you are ugly. You are very ugly." And then after a brief pause, "I'll be sober in the morning." And the second rumored response to this epic burn is, "I may be drunk, but in the morning I'll be sober. But you are ugly, and in the morning you'll still be ugly." Which version have you guys heard? Let me know down in the comments below, or if you've heard a different version. Personally, I heard about the second one.
My parents died when they were young and it was morbid, but at least they didn't ditch me when they were alive like yours did.
Churchill's parents were mostly laissez-faire with him and his siblings. They were actually mostly cared for by their nanny, Elizabeth Everest. When she died in 1895, Churchill actually wrote that she had been my dearest and most intimate friend during the whole of the 20 years I had lived. Churchill actually began boarding school at the age of 7 at St. George's School in Ascot, Berkshire. But he was not academic, nor was his behavior any good. It was actually downright poor. In 1884, he was transferred to Brunswick School in Hove, where his academic performance actually improved. In April 1888, at the age of 13, he narrowly passed the entrance exam for Harrow School. His father actually wanted him to prepare for a career in the military, and so his last 3 years at Harrow were in Army form. After 2 unsuccessful attempts to gain admittance to the Royal Military Academy in Sandhurst, he succeeded in his third. He was accepted as a cadet in the cavalry. Starting in September 1893, his father unfortunately died in January 1895, a month after Churchill had graduated from Sandhurst.
Oh shit, World War II soon? Well, Teddy's dropping bombs, so you best go, hadn't you too? You should be ashamed of your military honor. Everyone knows you're back at home, like thank God for Pearl Harbor.
Though the US had actually been involved in the war in several facets indirectly, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor was considered by the British Prime Minister to be incredibly appalling. Though, as he put it, he slept the sleep of the saved and the thankful. The US would enter the war. To Winston Churchill, the Japanese attack on the United States naval forces of Pearl Harbor was one of the greatest days of the most terrible war in Great Britain's history. He was appalled, he was calculating, and he was exhilarated, perhaps all in equal measures. He was dining at the Cares, a country retreat of prime ministers, when he heard of the news. His guests were U.S. Ambassador Gil Winnet and Averell Harriman, President Franklin D. Roosevelt's special envoy to Europe. A butler brought in a portable radio for the party to listen to the BBC Home Service. When the attack was confirmed, Churchill leapt to his feet and said he must declare war on Japan at once. His guests, however, dissuaded him from such an act. Historian Walter Reed recounts in Churchill 1940 to 1945, his book about wartime relations among the Allied leaders. The Prime Minister phoned Roosevelt and asked, "Mr. President, what's this about Japan?" FDR responded that it was true and they were all in the same boat now. To Churchill, this meant one thing above all: victory. Britain was no longer alone. Finally, the US would enter the war. Though, through the Lend-Lease and military aid to the Allies in the early years of the Second World War, the United States began to provide significant military supplies and other assistance to the Allies in September 1940. Even though the United States did not enter the war until December 1941, in early August 1941, the two leaders had actually met at a shipboard conference off the coast of Canada. Churchill thought that they had developed a strong relationship, and they had, but not as strong as Churchill had hoped. FDR was much more shrewd of the two about personal relations with other leaders. Some would say the American was at times deceptive about his intentions. However, Pearl Harbor rendered all of this irrelevant, with the United States behind the idea of total war in a way that a lesser attack would not have ever done. On December 11th, 1941, Adolf Hitler compounded Japan's strategic error by declaring war against the United States. He had always expected he would have done it to face the United States, and so thought, as a matter of course, to follow Japan's lead, writes Hastings in his History of the War, Inferno. That's it. Like, comment, subscribe. Video done.